Hey, Patrick, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. So, let's see. What time is it? Couple more people. All right. Yeah, good. Anybody else out there? We good? We're good. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming in this dreadful weather, but we have a really important topic that we're going to discuss today, and this is something that is very close to my heart, and I think it's really been at the core of the mission of the program that we've had on Iran for the last 6 years. And as you know, we've had lots of ups and downs between our governments, but the issue of people-to-people ties with Iran, I think, is very important. I wanted to quote something. This is from Harry Hubner. He's a professor emeritus at Canadian Mennonite University who's been to Iran at least 10 times. And he once wrote that, quote, "Dialogue is its own justification," unquote. I think that's very true. The connections that are made through these kinds of programs, athletic diplomacy, religious diplomacy, exchanges of scholars, Iranian students coming to this country. These are the kinds of connections that build bridges that last for lifetimes and that are also sometimes passed on to future generations. There's a handout outside that I hope you'll pick up. It's also online. It's about the history of cultural diplomacy with Iran. We have had enormous benefits to this country that have come from Iranians coming here, studying here, making contributions to scientific advances that benefit the United States and benefit the entire world. And of course, Iran has benefited as well from these connections. And they go back nearly 2 centuries to a time when Iran was called Persia. They've obviously had interruptions because of politics, but they have managed to endure. And I also wanted to point out to this current administration that many of the advances we've seen started under the George W. Bush administration, which revived a number of State Department programs that have facilitated bringing Iranians to this country since about 2006. And so it's a proud tradition, and it's one that we want to continue. I wanted to just show a couple of pictures of Iranians, of Americans in Iran and Iranians in the United States. So I don't know if we can get them up on the screen there. And maybe dim the lights just a little bit so you can see. I can probably see. This is Jordan Burroughs, an American wrestler in Iran, where he was embracing an Iranian wrestler during a competition. Jordan Burroughs is a rock star in Iran. Wrestling is a really important sport in that country, and our wrestlers have been able to go there since 1998 to compete in a variety of meets. and they have formed lasting bonds, and it's been, I think, very good for the sport of wrestling. A few years ago, the Olympics tried to eliminate wrestling as a sport from the Olympic Games, and it was Iran, the United States, and Russia that joined together to keep it in the Olympic Games. Let's see. There we go. These are some more pictures from competitions in Iran. Can you? These are the Iranian fans greeting the American wrestlers. Jordan, they're chanting Jordan, Jordan, Jordan. And you see the American flag, of course, in the stadium. Okay, and I think we just have a couple more pictures of this is Jordan Burroughs. And I think we also have one picture, hopefully, of some Iranian law students who recently came to the United States, if you can find that as well. Keep going, one more. Yes, these are some Iranian law students who came for a moot court competition in the U.S. just a few weeks ago. They managed to get their visas. It wasn't easy. And you can see from the smiles on their faces how much this meant to them. I did a story about them for the Al Monitor website. One of the students who came changes. But through it all, I think it's fair to say that the value of these people-to-people ties has outweighed whatever the complications or the drawbacks have been. So let me briefly introduce our speakers, who have come, some of them from quite a long way away. Dr. Stan Albrecht is the former president of Utah State University. He's just stepped down from that position, and he's going to discuss the history of collaboration and engagement between Utah State University and Iranian institutions, and he's also going to say something about a program that they had involving Lake Urmia, which is a lake threatened in Iran, and it bears some resemblance to the Great Salt Lake, I'm told. So some useful collaboration there. Next, we'll hear from Bahman Bakhtiari, who's also from Salt Lake City, where he's the executive director of the International Foundation for Civil Society. And Bachman's going to talk about sports exchanges like the ones that you saw, which he has facilitated for many years. And then we're going to hear from Dr. Kamir Alai. He's the Associate Dean for Global and Interdisciplinary Research at the State University of New York at Albany. And he's also the founding director of the University at Albany's Global Institute for Health and Human Rights. And he's going to talk about health diplomacy with Iran. And finally, Shahrzad Rezvani is an attorney dedicated to serving the public and organizing various initiatives involving the Iranian-American community. She's on the board of the Iranian-American Bar Association's DC chapter, which has been instrumental in facilitating travel here by young people like the Iranian law students you see here. And she's also been very, very involved in efforts to deal with the various travel bans and restrictions that have had, I'm afraid to say, a rather harmful effect on these exchanges. And we will talk about all of that. So may I invite our speakers to come up, and we will get into our discussion. So I think we're going to start with you, Dr. Albrecht, if we can, to tell us something about the long history of collaboration between
Utah State University and Iran, and some of the programs that you've had in more recent years, and also the whole subject of Iranian students in the United States. You know, there are over 12,000 Iranians studying in the United States right now, and it's not as much as it was before the revolution, but it's a pretty good number, and yes, we hope to keep those young people coming.
Well, Barbara, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity of being here and welcome everyone this morning. I grew up on a small farm in the deserts of southern Utah, so I learned never to curse the rain. So I know people are saying it's raining, I shouldn't be out in the rain. We always celebrated the rain, so I'm here to celebrate the rains with you. A Soviet visitor to the United States a number of years ago made an observation as he concluded his visit that America is great because America has great universities. And I think that we need to all recognize that much of the greatness that is American universities is impacted by the constant historical and current infusion of intellectual power that comes from across the world. When you look at great discoveries in our country, just for example, the 6 2016 American-based Nobel Prize winners in the sciences and economics areas were all foreign-born. And so we have the history of bright young people coming to the United States, studying at our universities, many of them staying, making a major contribution in our country, many of them returning home and making major contributions in their country. As Barbara indicates, we have a little over 12,000 students from Iran studying in American universities right now. Over 3/4 of those students are graduate students, and over half of those graduate students are in the fields of science and engineering. And they're absolutely critical to what goes on at our universities as teaching assistants, as research assistants, as research collaborators on a whole variety of projects. As I look at my own institution, if we didn't have that infusion of great students from countries like Iran coming, our graduate programs would be greatly weakened. And so it's so absolutely critical to who we are and what we do. And what I fear most, I mentioned to Barbara a few minutes ago that I recently returned to the United States from Australia. And Australia is actually kind of cheering what we're doing because it puts countries like Australia and Canada in a much more competitive position for those outstanding students. And we're going to see that impact, I think, increase. It's being reflected in the lack of visa applications. It's being reflected in a lower number of students, not just in science and engineering, but across the huge impacts. So I wanted to talk just briefly about that broader impact, the importance of those students, the importance of those student exchanges, give you just an example of a current partnership that Utah State University has, and then I'm going to conclude on a somewhat more personal level. In terms of the second level, as president of Utah State University in February of last year, I signed a memorandum of understanding between Utah State University and Urmia University in Iran. As Barbara indicated, there are a host of interesting historical similarities between Lake Urmia in Iran and the Great Salt Lake. These are two of the world's largest inland saltwater lakes. And Utah State University has for many years had a program basically studying the ecology, the biology of the Great Salt Lake. Colleagues in Iran, aware of that, established relationships with some of our faculty. We were then, after a period of months, able to establish this MOU, which creates opportunities for Iranian scholars to come to Utah State University, where we have student exchanges, faculty exchanges, research staff exchanges. We have joint programs going on there and at Utah State University. The MOU also allows students from there to come to Utah State University, and in turn students from Utah State University to go to their university. And so these kinds of research, scholarly, cultural exchanges are absolutely critical to what we do. My university has had a history of doing that. As my colleague to my left pointed out, it goes way back to post-World War II when the Point Four program was established. And one of my predecessors at Utah State University, President Franklin Harris, played a very, very critical role in establishing relationships in that great country, partnerships and collaborations that have extended over the years. These are exactly the kinds of things that are important to continuing to strengthen our institution, to strengthen American universities, and it would be a tragic loss if something happened that we were unable to continue those kinds of partnerships. Having students come there, having our students go and broaden their experience, having our students have the kinds of experiences that will allow them to operate more effectively in the world that we live in today. And then on a more personal level, a few years ago, my wife and I had the opportunity to be in Montreux, Switzerland, where we were hosted by one of Utah State graduates, a name that many of you will be familiar with, Ardashir Zahedi. The Honorable Ardashir Zahedi held an event at one of the most luxurious hotels in Montreux, to which he had invited political, economic, educational leaders from the country. And at that event, stood before that group and announced a major gift that he was making to my university to establish a professorship in international studies and to establish a whole series of scholarships for undergraduate and graduate students. You know, this was a bit of a surprise to many of the folks in the room. Utah State University, what's the connection? But he stood before that crowd that night, and something that I will never forget. I still get goosebumps on my arm when I think about it, but standing before that wonderful crowd with tears running down his cheek, he said, "I was born at Utah State University."
Wow.
He came to Utah State University in the late 1940s. Ardashir was the son of who was then the general of the Shah's armies. He went to our institution, he graduated, he then became what I think is probably the most influential graduate that we have ever had at our institution. He married the Shah's daughter. He became ambassador to the United States. He was ambassador to St. James Court in London, foreign minister of the government for a period of time. And then following the revolution, ended up in exile in Switzerland, in the city of Montreux, where in many ways he became sort of the titular head of the large Iranian diaspora. While I was in his home, his phone would ring constantly with calls from around the world. He entertained presidents, chancellors, kings, rulers, popes, and had actually hosted 6 American presidents, played a significant role in assisting President Nixon in opening the way into China and establishing relationships in China, played an important role in enhancing diplomatic opportunities between the United States and Pakistan. And so did some incredible kinds of things that helped make our world a better place. I use that as just one example because there are many students who have come to our institutions that have then made this kind of impact on the world. In the case of my own institution, that includes an individual who became Minister of Education in Saudi Arabia, certainly a major player in terms of demonstrating the importance of a woman scholar in Saudi Arabia. We can look across the Middle East and find those who came and graduated, were a part of our water lab, who affect water science in an amazingly important way. And so over the years, as I've been able to reestablish and establish contact with many of these people, I've been reminded of the fact that even though there have been hiccups and bumps and concerns about positions taken by the American government, they've remained loyal and devoted friends, not only to my institution, but to the United States of America. And we would be a far poorer country without those relationships. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Very well said, thank you. In a more contemporary example, during the nuclear negotiations, you may know that virtually all of the chief Iranian negotiators had PhDs from American universities, and some of them had even undergraduate education. Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, of course, studied here both as an undergraduate and as a graduate. So these kinds of connections are always helpful. You never know sometimes when they will be helpful, but they're really important to continue. I want to turn next to Bahman because sports diplomacy, we had an entire event just on sports diplomacy about a year and a half ago. It's one of the few areas that really has managed to stay outside politics, I think, for both the US and Iran. And it's enormously popular, obviously, in Iran. You saw those of you who came in late, we showed a video of Jordan Burroughs, an American wrestling champion, and the kind of crowds that he attracts in Iran. But Bahman, tell us a little bit about the history of this and also some future plans that you hope to be able to bring about. I know we want to bring some Iranian basketball players
Yes.
here at some point, but we'll see, maybe next year. Go.
Well, thank you very much, Barbara. And I think Stan also should be very proud of Utah State for being one of the first American universities to sign an MOU with an Iranian college, technical college in Iran in 1950.
It's true.
Signed, I think, with Karaj Agricultural College. And when I was doing research in Iran, I frequently saw people from Utah State back and forth to Karaj. And I said, well, this is amazing that you have such a reach. And also BYU has had that strong presence in Iran.
Yes.
Several of their administrators in BYU currently, lived in Iran, Erland Peterson. So when they get up and talk about Iran, they speak about their experience in Shiraz, Esfahan, and that kind of people-to-people relationship is so important because now it has lasted, as Barbara mentioned. So when it comes to sport diplomacy, it's a similar relationship that we have cultivated. Iranians really had a kind of a reserved approach when it came to sport diplomacy with U.S. In the beginning, the revolution disrupted everything, and in 1984, Iranians boycotted the Los Angeles Olympics. They were concerned because of the politics in LA, and they were thinking that if the athletes come, they would defect and so forth. But then suddenly, in early 1990s, the approach changed, and Iranians were getting ready to come to Atlanta for the Olympics in 1996. And coming to Atlanta for the Olympics in 1996 was a huge development inside Iran. It kind of preceded a year before the election of a reformist in Iran. A reformist president was elected in 1997, and that sport diplomacy at that time had an impact inside Iran for President Khatami to come later and invite the wrestlers to Iran in 1998. So that 1996 is really the beginning of sport diplomacy between US and Iran, and it was conducted under the Olympics umbrella, so it allowed a lot of flexibility for Iranians, and Iranians could talk about their emotions, positive emotions about America, and in the same time, they will talk about how in wrestling, we could have a kind of a proud relationship with America, because in sports, we show how one country can be better than the other. So by that experience, I cite that experience because today's president of Iranian Wrestling Federation is a person who won a gold in the Atlanta Olympics in 1996, Rasul Khadem. And he gradually went to become very influential in Iranian Tehran municipal city. He was almost becoming a mayor. His very close relationship, his family with Iranian clerics and so forth. That experience that he had in 1996, today when you sit down and talk to him about America, he always gives that example about why the wrestling team from Iran should come to America. So positive experiences have an impact. Positive experiences have an impact, especially in sports. And in 1996, when that happened, Iranian Wrestling Federation got the go-ahead, the green light with the election of President Khatami to come to more tournaments in the United States. Since then, US team and Iranian team have met each other 32 times in different capacities, 32 times. Of course, Iranians have been victorious 22 times, but the friendship that has happened during these matches, travel to America, is really cultivated and institutionalized, I will argue, to an extent that no matter what government is in power in Tehran or Washington, this relationship will continue now. The example of the latest travel of the American wrestlers to Iran is a good example, because when Trump administration declared the travel ban, it coincided almost with the travel of American wrestlers to Iran. American wrestlers were really upset about that. Iranian Wrestling Federation was upset that the Iranian government retaliated. So some form of a natural symbiotic relationship began to form. Iranian Wrestling Federation lobbied the Iranian government to reverse the decision. American wrestlers went to the US Olympic Committee and started lobbying the Trump administration to exempt athletes from coming to Iran. At the same time, all the American wrestlers started giving media interviews about their love for the country, how many times they've traveled there. This public pressure, which is part of that public diplomacy, pressured, I think, the Iranian government to reverse its decision. Now, the justification was the court ruling in Seattle, but I don't think Iranian Foreign Ministry follows the judiciary here.
Well, actually, I think they do. But
They do,
but it was fortuitous, yes.
It was fortuitous, but I think the pressure was from inside Iran, from the wrestling lobby inside Iran, who went to the Iranian foreign minister and said, if you disrupt this, our reputation, our national honor will be questioned. And so that went to the Minister of Sport, so it was reversed. So that's a great example of sport diplomacy outlasting political tension, because tensions between US and Iran have been there forever, since 1979. If we do not have tension, it will be really a surprise. So many of the civil society advocates, particularly in the sports arena, have learned to live with tensions and pursue parallel relationships. And these parallel relationships have had impact on reducing tensions. So that example that I gave you just recently is very important. The second example of sport diplomacy that is not frequently mentioned between Iran and US is the degree of Iranian Americans in this country who have gotten engaged with their home country. Because for whatever reasons Iranian Americans came here, there has been this tense relationship with the home country. With sports, by bringing the teams here, when they come here, they see the flag, they start cheering for their country. You begin to see a different feelings among the Iranian Americans here. And Iranian Americans here are really the link for sport diplomacy with Iran, because these Iranian Americans in this country have stepped forward as philanthropists, donors. We have several donors now in the Iranian American community that put money forward for sport action. We have several donors in California who put their businesses forward when the teams come. Several restaurants in California owned by Iranians, they provide free catering to all the wrestling teams that come to Los Angeles on their own. There is a major Iranian businessman in Orange County who offers these cash credit cards for all the Iranian wrestlers to go shopping and take stuff back home. And these are the people-to-people relationship that has been now cultivated. And part of the whole goals of the sport diplomacy is really people-to-people. Now, whether they're coaches, president of federation, doctors, philanthropists, sponsors, trainers, wrestlers, athletes, just one component of it. We see athletes on the mat, but they're wrestling for 6 minutes. Behind that, all these people have come together to make that possible. Behind this, Iranian philanthropists like Khosrow Semnani Foundation sits next to several American philanthropists and sponsors together. And they come up with creative ideas of projects. They are the ones who sit down and say, let's bring the World Cup to America. We will fund it. Now, next World Cup is coming to Iowa. Many people may not. I think Iowa today is being mentioned as a place that is cutting healthcare for everybody. But Iowa is going to become the World Cup 218 for wrestling.
Really?
And many of the donors sitting around the table, we were discussing this, they said, we need to bring the Iranians to mid-America.
Sure.
We cannot keep taking Iranians to Los Angeles and New York. We need to take them to Nebraska, Iowa. And it just happened. So this is the example that Iranian American community has stepped forward for that. And the Iranians on that other side, the Iranian Wrestling Federation, has been very cooperative. They now commit to the events, and they keep their commitments, which is very important, because in sports, if you back down last minute, it will have so much negative impact. So it's not similar to going to a conference and one person doesn't show up to give a paper, and you can always have somebody else to give that paper. When it comes to sports, if a team doesn't show up, it has a huge public negative impact. And they have maintained that commitment. Another aspects that we have created is we have now developed prize achievement awards for Olympians. American wrestlers, when they win Olympic medal, they receive $250,000 cash.
Wow.
And when the Iranians went to Rio Olympics, they heard about this. They were really kind of set back that why do they not get such an award? And one of the Iranian philanthropists stepped forward and said, I'm going to give you guys cash award. And they were just stunned when they heard that. So Semnani Family Foundation has come forward with prize money for all gold medalists, silver medalists, bronze medalists of Iranian wrestling team. And they're going to give these prizes so that the Iranian wrestlers do not feel in any way unequal to their American counterparts. Now we are working with OFAC to get the license for this transition to take place. And my final example of the sport diplomacy is the impact we are having on US government. I think on U.S. government, we also are having an impact with the sport diplomacy. Sport diplomacy has now created a situation between Iran and the United States that as part of the projects, no one in the U.S. government needs to make an argument for it anymore because of the record of what has happened. And also in the U.S. government, in public diplomacy, sport is a low-cost, highly attractive, receive media attention, and with sports we connect to local governments, to ambassadors, to diplomats. It's a very low-cost operation for U.S. government, and U.S. government gets maximum attention. And many people talk about echoes of ping-pong diplomacy between Iran and the United States. They talk about wrestling diplomacy. We have talked about volleyball diplomacy. We have talked about soccer diplomacy. And all of that has begun to gradually settle in. And I'm kind of optimistic that when it comes to sport diplomacy now, both governments have acknowledged the importance of it. And finally, I would say that today in the presidential debate in Iran, the issue of public diplomacy and sport diplomacy came up. And one of the candidates strongly come forward and said, we need to maintain sport diplomacy.
This is the reformist.
It was the first time I've ever heard in a presidential debate in Iran. And because sport diplomacy is such a Western term, in Persian, diplomacy ورزشی really does not have any meaning. But now he's beginning to talk about it, and the gentleman said diplomacy ورزشی, and my ears just picked up. And so in terms of vocabulary of diplomacy, I think the sport diplomacy is beginning to have an impact when a high official talks about it.
Thanks, Bachman. I also want to, besides the Iranian American community, I want to pay tribute to the American wrestling community.
Yes.
I have discovered that Americans who've ever wrestled at any time in their lives are a very, very important lobby in favor of continuing these types of exchanges and have really been helpful in this as well. So it's good that everyone sees the value of this. I want to turn next to medical diplomacy. There is also a long history there. I believe that American missionaries founded the first medical school in Iran back in the 1800s, yeah? And of course, there have been many wonderful Iranians who've come here and practiced and so on. But Kamiar, you have a rather unique experience. I'd like you to tell a little bit about the AIDS work that you did in Iran and about the work that you're continuing to do here, and also about the sometimes bumpy path to people-to-people ties. So please begin.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate even the weather was not very great. All of you came here. So I want to just give a little background of what we started, what was the situation on HIV in Iran, as you know. Until 1999, there was a huge silence about HIV, AIDS. A lot of the drug users, ended up in prison. They had no rights. So when we started the program, there was huge social stigma. And the first study we did, more than 50% they committed suicide during the first year of their seroconversion in one of the cities.
Wow.
So we realized there are a lot of conflicts, but instead of just making our job easier to just fight and just have a voice, to have a dialogue, to have a better communication and have a mutual understanding between key players. So we realized that one of the main concerns of the government was the attitude of religious leaders. We tried to identify more open-minded and well-educated religious leaders. Even their numbers were not a lot, but we started talking to them. And when we talked to them, we wanted to have a better understanding. Because when we talk about HIV, AIDS, said, do you want to work with sex workers? We said, no, we want to protect new babies, they don't get HIV. So there's no religion saying no to that. And then they say, okay, no problem, we can start protecting babies. And later on we said we want to protect mother of that baby, because if mother doesn't get HIV, then the baby doesn't get HIV. We said, okay, let's have mother. And then later on we said if father get HIV, then mother get HIV. So step by step to extending the target population, reduce the sensitivity and rephrasing. For example, instead of talking about sex workers, we said we want to work with vulnerable women, okay? That was key components and bringing some of the religious components into it. For example, in Iran, drinking alcohol is prohibited, but if you are in a desert and you cannot find water, you can drink alcohol to survive. So between bad, which is drinking alcohol, and worse, to die, bad is better. So we use the same framework. So talking about condom was bad, but getting HIV is worse. Let's talk about bad thing to prevent and protect population from worse thing. So step by step, our approach was successful. And instead of just saying this is what we are doing, we share the credits with the officials. And when they got the credits, by positive reinforcement, we brought them to international bodies. So we went to international conferences from 2001, and then we said, this is what Iran started, and this is what they want to do. Then there were a lot of media came to them, oh, what do you want to do? Then they said, what should I do? I said, say, next 6 months, I will do something. So step by step, I called dance with them. How do you dance with your partner? So you have to have more cooperation, better understanding. That was the strategy we started. We extended from one city to the nationwide. In 3 years, became 150. And then we extended to Afghanistan and Tajikistan through the same language, culture diplomacy. And then as a religious diplomacy, we extended to other countries in the Middle East, North Africa, Southeast Asia. We had a lot of visitors from Indonesia in 2001, in Malaysia. That after that, they started to say, oh, how Iran as a more conservative opened the door. So we have to use our own strategy. And then in 2004, we realized that there are a lot of doctors now, they got interested to work on HIV/AIDS. They need to improve their knowledge and expertise. We brought experts from the US, from Harvard, Hopkins, Yale. And we had a workshop, we said this is only for Iranians, we said this is for the region. But Iranians were the main participants. So by this, we said we want to educate other countries, but Iran will be, as a leader, the host of the region. So that will be a good engagement and dialogue, not between just Iran and the US, but in the regional level. In addition to this, we realize, as you know, 70% of the population in Iran are less than 35 years old. We have huge population who are at risk for HIV substance use. And also, we have a lot of Iranian Americans who live in the US and some of the Americans who may be interested in Iran. So we started to approach them since 2002, brought students, Iranian American and American from the US to Iran. We started with 2 students in 2002. Ended up in 2008, we had 310 applicants. And each summer, we had between 15 to 25 students. During the summer, they went to Iran. Our hope was that a lot of Iranian students, they just look at media, say, oh, everybody in the US have fun, dance. They don't care about other things. But when they see those, they go to Iran. They are caring about women's health issues, substance use, HIV. They get motivated through a peer-to-peer education. They build up this friendship. A lot of them, when they return back, they continued and they build up those friendship. And some of those Iranian students came to the US. So that was the building the bridge between these two, networks. In 2005, I talked to some of the, US officials about HIV diplomacy should be a good way of dialogue. And in 2006, US officials, they started to have the first exchange program between Iran and the US. And there were a lot of concerns. Say, if we bring these scholars from Iran, nobody will return back. We said, if you have a good selection criteria, definitely they will go back. And we were part of talking to a lot of groups. They started in December 2006. The first delegates came to the US. They was hosted by Aspen Institute in collaboration with IIE. And all of them, they returned back. And that was a good example during Bush administration, during Republican. As you know, Bush was one of the pioneers of PEPFAR, who has spent billions of dollars on HIV/AIDS. And that was one of the model of diplomacy during Republican, that we have to keep the door open. But that was extended beyond that, initial thought, and there were other NGOs got involved. They have their own agendas that it had a major impact on this, strong collaboration. And we were working on HIV/AIDS. Then the president, Ahmadinejad, said we don't have gays, and then they got suspicious. We ended up being in prison for 3 years due to our work on HIV/AIDS. When we in prison, I applied some of my skill of negotiation with prison organizations to open, the opportunity for other prisoners to have access to healthcare services. So that was a good, way of working. Then I got released in 2011. I said we have to continue the work. That was maybe not successful, but it had some success. We want to learn the lesson we got and then revisit again. And that was during the new administration in Iran that they wanted to have a more dialogue. And that was we were heavily engaged to have a dialogue for both sides and thanks to a lot of people, including Greg and Sherwin and a lot of other wonderful people, that they care about human, not just a job as a job, to have a long-term impact. That was initiative. We had the first, Iranian officials from the university, two major universities, Tehran Medical University, the Chancellor, and Isfahan Medical University. They came to the U.S. We had MOU. And after that, we had another MOU with the Azad University, which is largest, 1.5 million students. I think it's the second largest in the world. And then continue this kind of collaboration.
How are you doing that exactly now?
So now we have a lot of projects. I don't want to share all the projects, but the point is that now we have trust. Because as you know, a lot of doctors in Iran, as you said, before revolution, they follow medical education in the US, and they are inspired by American scholars. And a lot of US doctors, they care about global health. So we try to have a kind of, to initiate, I sometimes make a joke, say, we matchmaking, Matchmaking, we try to just put some, area of interest. Because as you know, HIV doesn't need visa to cross border, yes? So that we need to have a kind of sustainable and long-term collaboration between, this kind of two parties. So I think today is very critical. Because there are a lot of excuses, they use human rights or other issues to close the door. If you want to improve the human rights and protection, this is the lesson we learned about HIV, that for 20 years, they had no right. Now you see how they have a lot of, opportunities. Look at family planning. It was 10 years before we started in Iran. Iran was one of the first countries that accepted family planning in the Muslim countries. Even today, there are a lot of countries in the Middle East, they don't accept family planning. So because it's very important, Iran and US had long-term collaborations. Before revolution, 55,000 Americans were in Iran. We have more than 1 million Iranians in the US that they go back and forth. They have a network. If you go and have a survey, I can say more than 95% of Iranians, they love American. So we have to keep the door open. And we know there are extremism in both sides. We don't know what's the agenda. Some of them, they want to close the door from Iranian sides to make a profit of black marketing. I don't know what's the agenda, but we shouldn't give them excuse. We have to keep the door opening. We have to have public diplomacy. We have to learn the lesson we got and build up based on that dialogue.
Thank you very much. Very brave individual. Now we're going to turn to Shahrzad, going to talk about the legal situation. As I mentioned, the Iranian American Bar Association was very helpful, and of course the State Department, in bringing Iranian law students to the US to compete in a moot court competition. They've been doing that since 2015, and it's been a fabulous experience for these young Iranians. But you've been very busy lately on other fronts, so I wanted you to talk about where all the legal status of these various travel bans, where that all stands, and what you expect going forward. So the floor is yours.
Okay,
Shahrzad,
thank you everyone for being here. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Iranian American Bar Association. We have 8 chapters nationwide, all active, and what we do is we seek to educate Iranian Americans on the legal issues that affect them. And we also try and advocate for them on their civil rights. And so one of the things we did when the travel ban went into effect is we basically went into panic mode, and we were stationed at Dulles Airport. We put out our email in the news, and we got calls and emails from individuals in Iran and all over the world that were stranded, and they had absolutely no idea what to do. And we contacted airlines, we contacted senators and congressmen, and we tried to figure out a way to get them here, whatever way that, by whatever means that we could. So what we're still doing right now is we filed a lawsuit. As you know, there are several lawsuits going on, and the travel ban is stayed at the moment. But we had filed our lawsuit before that happened, and we were in court last week with the help of civil rights law firms, and the case is still ongoing. They've asked for other documents from our side as well as the government lawyers, and you can actually see all of the files that we've submitted to the court on a website called endthetravelban.com, and you can read about the case and read about the plaintiffs that have been affected, and it's really interesting to see the different types of people that have been affected from all spectrums. And our case was basically that our community, the Iranian American community, has been adversely affected. And it was the Iranian American Bar Association plus other prominent organizations that filed this lawsuit jointly. So that's what we're doing right now. Another thing that we're doing is, with the help of our friends at the State Department, we are compiling lists every month of individuals that are stuck in administrative processing. So as you may know, when you apply for your visa, you have to go to an interview in another country since there's no consulate in Iran. And so people travel there, and then for some reason they get stuck in extended processing. And there's people that have been stuck in this system for years. And so people have been contacting us, letting us know their situation, and we're trying to put together a list in the hopes that we can help expedite their case. Another thing that we do is we have a legal clinic for Iranian Americans that have cases, and for whatever reason they're unable to afford a lawyer. And all of the work that we do is volunteer. We do it all pro bono, outside of our regular jobs. And what Barbara mentioned about the moot court competition, so this is a competition where international law students come here from countries all over the world, 600 law schools, I think, in 90 countries. And with the help of the State Department, again, we were able to bring the students here, and they actually there was one team that didn't get their visas.
In time, right.
They couldn't get to the country that they had to go to in time, and unfortunately they weren't able to be here, even though they were one of the top schools in the competition, which was really unfortunate. But there were 7 individuals that were able to come here, and it was just they were just so excited to be here. As you saw, they just couldn't believe that they were here, and they were making friends from all over the world. They had found girlfriends in other countries, and they were just so excited. And just thinking that if they hadn't had the opportunity, they would maybe have no other opportunity to ever come here. So, for next year, hopefully we'll be able to continue this process as long as they're involved in the competition. But it was a really very exciting time for them. And let's see, what else can I tell you? So basically, as others have mentioned, turning away these individuals that Iranians have so many successful people in companies, in Google, eBay, Twitter, all the government agencies. My own father is a scientist and a professor at a top university, and he goes to Iran and gives conferences in Iran. And there's so many people that do this type of work, and we would be very remiss to not allow that to happen anymore. And what else was I going to mention? I'm sorry. It's just, I'm sorry, I'm having a moment.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Those that are, I'm sorry, I'm having a moment.
Okay,
Sorry.
we'll come back to you, but I think it's fair to say this has been a very emotional couple of months.
Yeah, it has.
For all of us with the new administration, that we didn't really quite know what to expect. And
Right.
I think that the travel ban being the first sort of big act was a very upsetting thing for those of us who know the value in particular of these kinds of exchanges. But of course it also affected Iranians visiting their families, and just a lot of ordinary people who were sort of caught up in this. But we are very hopeful that when people see the record of these kinds of exchanges and the benefits that accrue to Americans from these exchanges, both immediately and over a long term, that it will have some influence, hopefully, on our government, certainly to facilitate these kinds of travelers above all. I wanted to turn, we're going to turn to your questions now, but I wanted to ask Ed Martin in the corner there if you want to say a few words about religious diplomacy. I had mentioned, I think that Ed is from Eastern Mennonite University. The Mennonites have been going to Iran since an earthquake in 1990 and have developed quite a program. But there's also an Abrahamic dialogue that has gone on for a number of years. So I put you on the spot just to say a few words, if you would, since you've come a long way.
Well, I want to keep it short because we have a strong panel here and a lot of questions, I'm sure, for them. But as Barbara mentioned, we got involved in Iran after a major earthquake in June of 1990. I was at that time working for Mennonite Central Committee, the Relief, Development, and Peace Building organization of the Mennonite Church. And we wanted to respond both because of the size of the tragedy, more than 35,000 people were killed and lots injured, but also the geopolitics of that time. You know, the Berlin Wall had just come down, the Soviet Union was collapsing, the Cold War was ending, and it seemed to some of us, in the eyes of our government, that Islam was replacing communism as the enemy, and Tehran was replacing Moscow as the source of evil in the world. And we wanted to demonstrate that we would respond to human need wherever it was, any place in the world, irrespective of religious and political differences, and wanted to reach out to the people of Iran and develop relationships. We didn't know how to, but anyway, eventually we were able to collaborate with both the Iranian Red Crescent Society and the Housing Foundation on some relief and reconstruction. And a delegation visited Iran in early '91, and for some years we collaborated mainly with the Red Crescent Society, but we wanted to find a way to have more of a presence in Iran and thought of a student exchange program as being a way to do it, and developed this through contacts in the UN mission in New York. And I knew I wanted to send Americans to Iran to study Farsi, to study Islam, to study Persian literature. I thought Iran would want to send engineers and scientists to study in this side of the ocean. I was surprised when I learned that they wanted to send some philosophers in to study philosophy of religion. And so a couple students came to Toronto and studied philosophy of religion at the Toronto School of Theology. And Mennonites went to Qom and studied, as I said, Islam and Farsi and Persian literature. Out of that grew a series of interfaith dialogue conferences. There have been 6. They've alternated actually between Canada and Qom. The 7th one will be in June in Winnipeg at Canadian Mennonite University, organized in part by Dr. Harry Hubner, who Barbara quoted at the very beginning of this session.
Yeah.
And there have been a number of students from Iran who have come to Eastern Mennonite University to the Summer Peace Building Institute of the Center for Justice and Peace Building.
I met some of them last year.
Yeah, there were 9 women here several years ago from Jamaat Azara, the women's seminary in Qom. And so it's just been a remarkable and really fun engagement. And I'm very pleased to learn more about everything else that's going on. Ours is a very small effort, but I think we have benefited a lot from it, and I hope our Iranian colleagues have as well.
Thank you very much for contributing. We'll go to this gentleman in the front row. If you could say your name and ask a question. Wait for the microphone. Thank you.
I'm Amir Obey from Iraqi Embassy. I mean,
welcome.
it's really interesting, and for me, it's really happy to see those efforts to link between Washington and Tehran. And well, what's going on in the news every day? It's in Tehran talking about the great devil, which is U.S., and from the other side, the #1 sponsor of terrorism in the world, which is Iran. And still there are many, if I can say, unknown soldiers who are working in the out of the light and the concentration of the media. So my question, what's the impact of, if you can see it from the American side, the new administration, either on the political aspect, the acceleration against Iran, and from the executive aspect, which is the travel ban, and now we heard that there is a cut in the budget, especially of State Department, which has always been, I think it will be direct impact on the humanitarian efforts, and either on science or medical or sport or the other side is from Tehran. Is there any impact, if we can say negative, if Mr. Rouhani will not be re-elected again? And thank you.
Sure. Well, it's a lot of questions, and we have some others in the audience who may be better prepared to, but I don't want to put them in the spot. I think there's still a kind of wait and see attitude, and I mean, one of the reasons we decided to have this panel was to explain the benefits of these programs. I mean, you know, I mentioned this, we put this out online, this little paper that I wrote, but there's over $300 million that is spent in this country at American universities by Iranian students who come here. There was an Iranian graduate student at University of California, Irvine, who came up with a program for monitoring using satellites, you know, desertification and water and so on, which is of enormous help for the entire world, not just California or dry places in this country and Iran. We wanted to highlight all of this, the goodwill that sports diplomacy brings, the understanding that religious diplomacy brings, the impact on people's lives of having proper treatment. And so we hope that whatever decisions the administration makes about U.S. policy toward Iran, that it carves out a space to continue this kind of work. As I mentioned, a lot of this was revived under the Bush administration, under a Republican administration that was very opposed to Iranian policies on a number of fronts, but saw the value of continuing these programs. As for Iran, Bahman mentioned that an Iranian presidential candidate referred to cultural diplomacy in the debate today. So clearly there's an understanding on the Iranian side that this has value as well. But I guess the jury is still out. State Department only got, I think, a 1% cut in the continuing budget that goes through the end of the fiscal year, and there'll obviously be a lot of negotiations about what comes. I know that Rex Tillerson has given everyone a questionnaire, so I hope that those who work in cultural diplomacy, when they fill out that questionnaire, will stress that this is one thing that you cannot cut. Find something else. But that's just my personal view. I don't know if anybody else wants to chime in on this or say a word about it.
I think in sport diplomacy, as I mentioned, you have sport federations in this country who know the value of their Olympians and the athletes and the influence they have. So USA Wrestling right now has compiled a list of all the congressmen, senators who are former wrestlers.
Wonderful.
And they are now making direct connections with them. And several Tea Party members are former wrestlers, and they have gotten these people on board to exempt athletes from going to Iran. So there is this natural energy, I think, that is not shown in the media that is brewing up among the sport federations. And U.S. Olympic Committee is very interested in winning the Los Angeles bid for Olympics in 2024. And right now, U.S. Olympic Committee was very concerned about this travel ban. And they came to the USA Wrestling because USA Wrestling has held 4 international tournaments in Los Angeles. And the president of International Federation of Wrestling is a member of the IOC. He will vote on it. So these kind of interactions worked, and Los Angeles still one of the 2 cities, and they've gotten a commitment from the Trump administration that the Trump administration supports the bid. Now, I think these things would not have happened if all this sport diplomacy was not taking place.
Sure.
And I think we have to look at the impact from bottom up, and the more independent these organizations become from Washington, the more positive results they will have. I mean, I say this in a way that I think with the Trump travel ban, there is an opportunity for all civil society advocates, sports, to express their independence and argue exactly for what we are arguing today, that the more reliance on government is not good. And inside Iran is the same thing, because as I give the examples of these wrestlers, they were publicly engaged in lobbying their governments. Iranian wrestlers were lobbying their government, American wrestlers were lobbying them. That all happened without any interactions of the State Department or anything. So CNN had a headline, "Wrestlers become a sports diplomat."
Yeah.
So I see this kind of a natural brewing of energy within the sport community as a kind of a positive results that is gotten institutionalized. And regardless of what happens, they will try to use their maximum force on that. Now,
Yeah, Dr. Albrecht, what about university presidents and so on? They've also,
Yeah, I wanted to comment on this. I think we face a really challenging time, and all of you certainly understand this. I appreciate the value of the bottom-up sort of thing. But I also find almost every day evidence that some of the actions many of the actions being taken by our current president really reinforce his base. And so they cheer that. And so what is the role of universities? What is the role of university presidents? One of my colleagues observed that university presidents seem to have been rather silent on this issue on the travel ban. I think they probably have individually. I think that's less true when you look at certain kinds of organizations of presidents like APLU, Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, that has made a very strong statement about the potential impacts that this has on all of our institutions, on our research programs, our graduate programs, and so on. But you know what I find interesting as a president who recently stepped down after 12 years in the role is that when we take those kinds of public positions, it really reinforces the attitude that, well, these are bastions of liberality. You know, you would expect universities to do that, and so you throw that kind of red meat to the Trump base and you enforce the Trump base. And that's very concerning. I'm not sure quite how we wind our way through this. I think it's going to be a really challenging time.
appreciate that. First to Nadia and then to Kay. Yeah, no, we'll get the mic.
Well, thank you very much for this very exciting conversation and discussion. I just wanted to know, to make two points. One is that there is this new movie coming up. It's called The American Wrestler, which is actually the story about an Iranian wrestler in the United States. And I think the very high profile Angelina Jolie's father is playing in it. And it's a very, apparently very, an important Hollywood or upcoming Hollywood movie, which is interesting from that point of view. My question is actually to Dr. Alaei. Bringing them here is actually the easy part, in the sense that even with the travel ban, and the problem is on the other side that people who come, they one way or the other run a difficulty, as you did, at somehow being on a radar screen and being called, I don't know, and risking really a lot for the exposure, of coming outside and interacting with these networks, with these international networks. In one way or the other, they can be kind of lumped into this Nufuzi group or whatever it is, the influence. It's called the influence. What, in your view, what can be done in order, or from your experience, both on the positive and the negative side, what can be done in order to reduce the risk that these people run in coming or accepting an invitation? I have organized myself many events, and at the very last moment, people said, no, we are scared to come. We thank you very much. We really want to come, but we are too scared to come and attend such events, particularly in the United States. Perhaps somewhere else it's easier. Thank you.
So thank you. That's a very important question. I think, so one point is transparency. We should be transparent. All the initiative we did, from 2006 to 2008 directly was transparent, and we involve universities, not NGOs. It's very important. When you involve academia in both sides, it's more transparent, and you have a clear subject. Yes, it's about health, environment, sport, religion. When it's clear and it's academic body involved, give more credibility. But if we want to just involve NGOs that a lot of them are not known in Iran, there's just conspiracy theory, there may be some agenda behind that. So I think that's the point. We have to involve more scientists, more scholars, that they have a track record of the scholarships. It shows they are independent, and that's the motivation to, to add value to this, not to just invite some people that they may have their own agenda. They have political interest, and they happen to be involved in this initiative. So that's the lesson I learned in the past, 17 years.
We should mention the American Academy of Sciences and the other scientific exchanges. I've written a lot about them in the paper. They've brought over 500 Iranians to this country since 2006, and I don't believe any of them have had any problems. They've done, workshops on earthquake prevention, anticipation, water, environment, and so on. So I think that if these things are well prepared, and as you say, they're done through reputable institutions, that you have less of a problem. Fate, you had a question too.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for putting such a great panel together. I'm Faye Moqtadir. I'm a member of Atlantic Council. Just a very quick information to Mrs. Rezvani. There is a gentleman who is a very, very successful entrepreneur and a businessman in Silicon Valley, has just put a project together called Iranian Americans Contributions Project. And he has gone back to 50 years of detailed analysis of how the Iranian Americans who have come to this country, me included and many others as a student, have been able to contribute so much to this country, entrepreneur-wise, philanthropy, and many things. So you may want to check that out. His name is Pirooz Parvarande,
Okay.
and his project is called IACP, Iranian Americans Contribution Project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. I'll take a
Thank
look
you
at
for that.
too. All the way over at the end, yeah. Wait for the mic.
I thank you all very much. I'm Lauren Hershey. I'm an attorney. I'm semi-retired. I had been a Fulbright scholar heck of a long time ago in India, and when I was traveling back in 1969 through Afghanistan, Nepal, Kashmir, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Turkey, etc., I had the good fortune of going to my first discotheque ever in the city of Tehran. If that's not cross-cultural, then help me out here. For you, Barbara, thank you very much. This panel is extraordinary. The Fulbright Association, I don't speak for them. I've sat on their board. I'm active with them. He is always trying to be proactive in some way, and I would hope you would reassemble this group and bring them to an annual
I would
meeting.
love to. We've
And
tried.
I'll connect you up if I
We've
can.
suggested in a paper, we put out a paper now, it's 4 years ago, and we suggested a modified Fulbright program for Iran. Now, of course, it's difficult because we don't have an embassy, we don't have a consulate, so it's harder to identify people, certainly.
Goes to one of my jackpot questions for you. Why doesn't the Atlantic Council make that a goal to get diplomatic relations? We have them with China. We don't have. We're restoring them with Cuba. We have them with a country called Russia. I don't see why not, but then I echo J. William Fulbright. I do have a question. Does anybody in the room, can they say they either had a Fulbright or better yet, knew J. William Fulbright, who was a president of the University of Arkansas at age 30-something? I think his mom knew the governor was part of the story there. And the prior president died in an automobile accident, but that's a footnote in history. But really, this is quite extraordinary. I thank you all. I was thinking about ping-pong diplomacy with
Right,
China
we call it
back.
pin-down diplomacy with the wrestlers.
Pin down
so.
is good enough. I did a little wrestling myself. But really, just to thank you all very much for these very lucid and comprehensive presentations. Keep speaking out, unify, get freelancers like me to get on your side, trying to find a way to do that.
I will take your card when this is over.
I am supportive of the Atlantic Council. I don't know if I'm actually a member, but please continue your good works and strive hard and high.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Question over here.
Hi, I'm Jessica Sorsett. I'm with West End Strategy. I just had a question for whomever thinks they can best answer it. Just in terms of what you guys have spoken about, medical diplomacy, student diplomacy, sports diplomacy, how the nuclear deal played into that. We've seen, I think, besides the travel ban that dropped as soon as he came into office, but prior to that, that was probably the biggest sort of diplomacy effort that we've seen in years, if not decades, with Iran. Have we seen any sort of trickle down because of that? More students, more athletes wanting to come, or vice versa, go? And then the recent assaults or threats of assaults to the Iran deal, what do you suspect will happen if anything happens to this deal?
Well, it's probably my bailiwick. Yeah, you know, look, again, I'm very, very relieved that the administration has certified that Iran is in full compliance with the nuclear agreement, and that suggests to me that the U.S. government will continue to comply with the letter of the agreement. I have written that, frankly, both sides have violated the spirit of the deal. I think President Trump said recently that Iran had violated the spirit of the deal. I think they have done that through the fact that there are still Iranian Americans who are in prison in Iran, including some that were scooped up, some that were held before the deal, and some that were scooped up after the deal. I'm thinking in particular of Siamak Namazi and his 81-year-old father, Bakr. That if that doesn't violate the spirit of the deal, I don't know what does. On the U.S. side, of course, we have all these travel restrictions. No Iranian who has visited the United States in known memory has ever committed a terrorist act against any American on U.S. soil. That is just a fact. So anyone who tries to excuse that the travel bans on grounds of national security is simply not being honest. In fact, none of the countries that were on that list, as far as I know, no visitors from those countries, people who obtain valid visas, were ever involved in terrorist acts in this country. Most terrorist acts have been committed by people born here, and that's just a fact. So, you know, the spirit has been violated, and there has been a downturn in people coming for a variety of reasons. I think there was a bit of a honeymoon during the period of the nuclear negotiations. We saw more Iranian students coming, more exchanges going on, certainly more sports diplomacy, the moot court competition. That was in 2015 they started coming. So we've seen benefits from it, and now we see a little bit of a chilling effect. But again, our hope is that this area will be protected and that we will see Iranian students continue to come here, visa applications increase, and so on as we get through this period of administration review of Iran policy. But the hostile rhetoric, look, you know, it's on both sides. There was a period under Obama when there was less hostile rhetoric from the United States, but you still heard it in Iran. You still heard death to America at various events and so on. And now we're getting hostile rhetoric on this side against Iran. But you know, this is at this level, and the people to people should be here, you know. And we just have to sort of ignore the noise, if we can, at the top, and try to maintain these links with people.
I just want to add that I agree with everything you said, but I don't think the spirit of the people in Iran is so much affected. They still want to come here. You know, they just, the means of them coming here have been affected. But when you go there, Iranians love America and they love Americans, and you know, it's their dream to come here. It's just their means, you know, the travel ban, everything, that has been affected, obviously. So.
Well, I mean, I can give you one example of how the nuclear agreement affected the sport diplomacy. In 2014, in April, we had the Iranian wrestling teams come to Los Angeles. And during that trip in LA, they will not agree to do any interviews, particularly with Iranian TVs in LA. After the nuclear deal was signed, they gave interviews. They all participated in the Persian language radio. There is a 670 radio there. They all wanted to go on the radio. So what happened was that although you cannot say there were tangible impact, but people felt easier to go give interviews and talk more openly. When you have these tensions going on like this, people begin to withdraw, people begin to not speak. I think that's a danger for the countries, because when people withdraw and you don't know what is happening, who is contacting them. And in that sense, when we had the wrestlers come in 2015, after the nuclear deal, they were roundtables. They interacted with Iranian journalists from LA that they would have never interacted before. And they freely talked about how great it is to be in America.
Yeah.
So I think part of that agreement, even though I think nuclear agreement is an arms control agreement, we have to clarify that. And I think it's an arms control agreement like we signed arms control agreement with Soviet Union. And Iranians look at it as an arms control agreement. So although they violate the spirit, they say we're keeping the commitments to the terms of the deal.
Right.
So there's all these misunderstandings, and I think civil societies can kind of explain some of this better as we go forward, because I think for Iranian people, the nuclear deal did reduce tensions for them. It was a welcome step. I mean, today the language here of going against the deal is not supported inside Iran if you talk to young Iranians. Young Iranians, despite the restrictions, still support the deal. So I think with civil society interactions, we could bring more voice to this. We can explain it better in the West.
Yes, lady here.
Hi, my name is Audrey Williams. I'm with the Turkish Heritage Organization. And so I just want to thank the Atlantic Council and all of you for sharing your experiences, because I also think that people-to-people relations are incredibly important, and no matter how tense government to government may be, people-to-people should always keep going and kind of lay a foundation for whatever the future relations might be government-wise. And so my question is mostly about university-based exchanges, and then more on the American side. So, there are more than 12,000 Iranian students studying here, many fewer American students studying in Iran or having the opportunity to go to Iran. But when you're learning a language, or when you're, studying, for example, Iranian history, and you want to become kind of the next Iranian specialist, the best way is to go there and get some experience. I would imagine the opportunities are very few. And so for those of you who have had experience bringing American students to Iran, I wanted to know what challenges you faced, specifically from your universities in terms of selling these programs and getting these programs together, and then how you overcame those challenges as well.
So that's a very good question. So I think, we had two American groups, Iranian American and American. So when we wanted to bring Iranian American, I got a lot of calls from the parents saying, we forgot Iran for 30 years, we changed our names, now I'm not Ali, I'm Alex. No, you want to bring them back to Iran, They had to get birth certificate, passport. They say, oh, maybe they ended up, a lot of difficulties, but they went there, they love it. That's for Iranian American. And upon my knowledge, there is no American, they were in Iran, they got arrested. All of these who got arrested, they were Iranian American, that they entered with Iranian passport, not American passport. For American, I think they have no idea. Some of the American, even they don't know we have car inside Iran. They think we are still riding the camel, This is really true, This is really true. So I think when we build up this kind of academic exchange collaboration, and when we involve those professors from both sides involved, they started to have kind of area of research, because a scholarship is key, and there's a lot of understudied areas in Iran. So we can engage both, professors to develop this kind of collaboration, and then involve those students. Say, okay, now you go to Iran to do this research. So when we had some of those Americans went to Iran, they wanted to learn Farsi, because some of them, they wanted to learn Farsi, they ended up being in Tajikistan. In Tajikistan, they speak Farsi, but they write Russian. So it's really surprising. So then there was a Deh Khoda Institute in Iran. They went there. They had 2-3 days per week classes Farsi, and then they exposed to Iranian peers. They had a lot of fun time and dialogue. And when they returned back, they had a kind of through remotes dialogue. So I think this can be through some of Iranian American who are here, support some of the American students who wants to go there, because if we have a group of students who go there and they show how it's fun, that can be a good track record, because that's the problem we have. A lot of Iranians, they know about the beauty of America, but a lot of Americans, they don't know about the beauty of Iran.
Could I comment on
Yes,
that
please.
briefly? Again, a very good question. The issue you describe is much broader than our relationships with Iran. I probably, as a university president, signed 50 MOUs with countries from around the world, South Korea, Thailand, it goes wherever. And almost all of those agreements included opportunities for student exchanges, their students to come to Utah State, our students to go there. It was really easy to get students to come to Utah State. It was much more difficult to get our students to go there. And so we were always struggling with that because the exchanges were unequal. What we found, a couple of things worked well for us. One was to establish MOUs where we dealt with financial issues. For example, a student who was at Utah State and was going to study in South Korea would pay Utah State tuition to us, and their students would pay tuition to their home institutions, as opposed to some of the other financial complications that might be involved. That increased the opportunity. The other thing that worked well for us, in the Lake Ermia project is a good example, is our students who had spent undergraduate and some of their graduate years studying lake ecology, the Great Salt Lake, all of a sudden now had something else to study to sort of expand their experience and their knowledge and look for comparisons and differences. And so if you could do an MOU where you had a project that would engage the students, we were far more successful in doing what we were doing. The other thing that worked nicely for my institution is because of the state of Utah's religious history and so many young people go on LDS church missions, many of these students develop language abilities, and so that greatly facilitated the exchanges as well. So those kinds of things worked nicely for us, but it was always a challenge.
Of course, John Huntsman, I guess he's still our chairman, but he may be about to be the ambassador to Moscow.
Yes.
Of course, is another great product of your state. Yes. Wait for the microphone. Say who you are. It's a classmate of mine here.
Josh Henson. I went to school with Barbara, and she was impressive in college as she is now.
There you go. You have to say that to the mic.
Panels like this by the Atlantic Council do a great deal to forward the people-to-people aspect of diplomacy, which ultimately may be the only way we're going to get through to countries like Iran. I think it's important to underscore the fact that the average Iranian, in my 30 years of experience, actually likes the average American. They are a warm people. They have a tremendous sense of humor. And the best example I can give you this is a very good friend of mine who was on the U.S. national team, is an Iranian American. They were at an international event. You have to understand, wrestling is almost like a religion in Iran. And every Iranian spectator at this event could name every American on the team of America. Very few Americans could do that, but the Iranians could. And at one point, as the Americans were about to come in, the Iranian fans were chanting, "Death to America, death to America." And the minute that the American team walked in, they stopped, they all ran up to the Americans and started asking for autographs. So the public posture and the private feelings oftentimes are different.
I appreciate that, Josh. You know, the first chapter of the book I wrote on Iran and the U.S. is "Death to America, and can I have your autograph?" So it happened to me, too.
Barbara's been one step ahead of me ever since college.
Yes, John Limbert. We could not pass this opportunity to hear from one of our great diplomats.
Thank you, Barbara, and thanks for a terrific panel, and thanks for what you're doing here, and thank the panelists. I'd like to hear if any of them have a view. What to me is one of the hardest things in this whole question is how you break the pattern of I don't know what you call it, tit for tat negativity, the syndrome of there are going to be more flowers at my funeral than at yours. So what you saw, for example, when the travel ban came into effect, yes, the wrestling program was saved, but a lot of very good programs were not. So the Iranians canceled a big conference at Shiraz on Persianate societies, which had been in the works for years. Tourists were told they were not going to get visas. They could not get visas. My question to some of my Iranian friends was that to me the best response would have been the opposite. To open your doors.
Absolutely.
And say, look, you may be small, a stupid move on one side does not demand a counter stupid move on the other side. I must say I didn't get very far with that argument. I never do. But how do you break this? How do you break this pattern of sort of mutual, self-destructive negativity and sort of a reflective retaliation for moves like this.
Boy.
If you can figure that one out.
John, you're the one who could figure that out better than any of us.
For sure. That is so complex. One of the things, those of you who are associated with universities will appreciate this, but in my role as university president, you have to learn quickly the language of pragmatism. And you really must help individuals that surround you understand the pragmatic implications, as you have so eloquently described them, in the tit-for-tat kinds of things. I live in a very conservative state, very conservative politicians, one of the reddest states in America. What I find when I hear legislators criticizing the kinds of institution arrangements we're making is I turn it into an economic argument. And I talk about the fact that students and scholars who come will need housing, and they will pay tuition, and they will contribute to the local economy. You know, 1 million international students contribute 36 billion to the US economy. Sometimes that language works with our critics.
So, I think that's a very good question. I wish if everybody thought the way you think, we had peace everywhere.
Yeah, right, sure.
I think we have to understand the nuclear deal was recently, done, and for several years there was mistrust between two parties, especially in Iran. There were a lot of extremism that they said U.S. doesn't keep the words, yes, and that current administration in Iran, they want to say no, we can have a kind of mutual benefits of this deal, and when it happened, and then people they felt yes, that's a kind of good impact of diplomacy. There were a lot of pro of this diplomacy, but there were a lot of extremism said, you may be loser. So that was a kind of reaction, maybe it's a short-term reaction to show to those people, especially a lot of members of parliament or extremists, and say, no, we are not loser. If they do something wrong, we do something to show is a kind of mutual. And that, I think, was a way to just make some of people inside Iran happy. We are not just follow whatever they make order. We respect our identity, which is very important for Iranian as well.
Yeah.
So I think that way it was more cultural than diplomatic aspect.
Yeah, I think, John, if we look at it in context, there has been some improvements that has not been as much to have an impact on the diplomacy, but the improvements from their side, for example, just coming to international events without any conditions. Before any Iranian athletes wanted to travel to the United States, they had to fill out a form. It was a political form they had to fill out that says, when you go to America, you do not do X, Y, Z. If you defect, for example, they will confiscate your property. If you go against an Israeli, you have to withdraw. If you don't withdraw, we do this. All that forms have been dropped. They don't ask for that form anymore. So tit for tat was that form came when U.S. instituted fingerprinting. Fingerprinting. So when the fingerprinting came, they came up with that form. And then in 1998, when the Iranian team came to U.S. in Chicago to go to Oklahoma City, they were fingerprinted. And president of USA Wrestling actually went ahead and apologized to them, to the Iranian. That had a huge impact. So since then, they never raised the issue about the fingerprinting. I think so much is in terms of vocabulary, dialogue. If civil society from this side also shows respect, like the president of USA Wrestling did, went and apologized for what Iranians are smart enough to understand that governments to governments do things that people to people are not doing. So a lot of messages has to come from this side too, that first of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that this travel ban has discriminated against Iranians. This is the subject of every Iranian newspaper in Iran. Why Iranians are selected. And for them, it's discriminatory. And I think that discrimination, that thing from this side has to receive a voice, has to receive a supportive voice. So you have to have not just tit for tat, but also tit for tat in supportive voices that could match these things. As long as we don't have the tit for tat in supportive voices, then the negative ones will get worse.
The Iranian law students who came here said they had a wonderful reception. They didn't have problems when they came to the country at the airports and so on. They were very pleasantly surprised by that. And they also said that I think that a lot of Americans had gone out of their way basically to apologize to them for the problems that the visa ban had posed. And that was something that they hadn't expected. So, you know, Iranians who come here, like anyone who comes here, they see all sides of America, just as those of us who've been lucky enough to go to Iran see all sides of Iran. And I put my money on the people of these countries every day. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, my speakers. You were wonderful. Thank you. You're all invited to stay and have some lunch.